So, hi.
Hey.
To start off with, just saw a lovely bird fly through your back there. What is your name and where are you?
Well, my name is Steve Vinay Gunther. I put the Vinay in there because that's the name that I like to use. That's my sort of spiritual name that friends use. Steve is my birth name. I'm in Mullumbimby in northern New South Wales, Australia. Currently staying with my grandchildren for a few weeks. Yeah, it's really great. Every morning they come in and we play for an hour before school, and then after school they come and we play for a couple hours. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
Nice. So,
And
go ahead.
Yeah, so you said, what was it? Who am I, or what was the?
No, I wasn't at the who are you yet, but that is the first question. It was just, what's your name and where are you? But the first real question is, who are you? Who you are as a person, as a human being, your values, your passions, your interests, however you'd like to present yourself.
Sure. Well, I mean, who I am is, of course, some roles that I have, like grandparent, which I really delight in, and I've got 4 grandchildren. And I'm also the parent, well, a parent of 3 children and the step-parent of 2 children, who I also consider my children. So that's a kind of major part of me. Husband, that's significant. It's something that I take seriously. It's my second marriage, 20 years now. So it's a long journey, which, contains lots of learning. So I consider that an important part of my life and who I am. And I'm also a teacher. I love teaching. I like teaching Gestalt, and a therapist. I love doing Gestalt. And what else? I guess in terms of my sense of myself, although this sounds like a slightly pretentious word, but I think I'm a bit of a maverick. I don't really kind of fit in exactly to anywhere, really. I was born in England. My parents are from Los Angeles. I grew up in Australia. So I have 3 passports, and I don't really identify as an Australian. I mean, I grew up in Australia and I'm familiar with its culture. My family's all Jewish, but I wasn't raised in a Jewish tradition. So I feel like I'm on the periphery of all sorts of things, which, when I was young, that was difficult, being the outsider. And now as an, mature adult, I kind of like it. I like the fluidity it gives me to be, for instance, around different cultures, which I really love doing. I love traveling and teaching and learning about different cultures. So I guess that's part of the characteristic of who I am. And I'm also, I guess, a risk taker. I like adventure. I like new experiences. I tend to jump into things sometimes without thinking about them too much. So I have lots of interesting experiences, and sometimes they're great and sometimes they're disastrous. But I kind of like living my life that way, I guess. Yeah. What
Would you
else can I
say that
say?
there's any particular value that you organize yourself around, or principles?
Sure. Well, I mean, I guess, the Gestalt values as core values: authenticity, existential responsibility, kind of relationality. Those are certain things that I hold dear and I try to live my life through as much as I can. I also value spirituality, spiritual growth, which I have my own particular understanding of and I'm really quite passionate about. So that's like a core organizing value, the sort of larger picture of, what life's about and what I'm doing here, and my participation in practices which kind of help me delve more deeply into that experience. That's definitely a core value. And I also have sort of quite strong values around society and the growth of society and, green economics and that type of thing. Those are things that are really important to me: social change and what I understand as a progressive way. So those things all kind of steer me through my life.
Okay. And I'm wondering also, historically, if anything comes to mind as a particular event or as a set of circumstances that you would say really marked you or shaped you in some significant way?
Sure. Well, I can think of a particular event, which was a week-long event, which I'll sort of give you the context for. So when I was 13, I attended a talk with my mother about reevaluation counselling, which is kind of peer counselling process that was particularly popular in the 70s. I think it's still around a little bit. And so when I was listening to the talk, I had a bit of an agenda in my mind that, you know, this would be good for my mum and it'd help make her more assertive with my father. And then I was listening to the talk and then suddenly I said, oh, this is really interesting. I wouldn't mind learning about it. So we both enrolled in these reevaluation counselling classes in Hobart, Tasmania, in 1972, I guess. And so we did that for a year, and then we used to go back to the US once every few years to visit the relatives to Los Angeles. So at the end of that year, 72, 73, we went to a week-long workshop retreat up in La Sherpa, which is a retreat site in San Bernardino outside Santa Barbara. And so that week was, you know, it's like 1972, it's just post the 60s. It was a bit like a love-in a sense, you know, it was just like a whole week of sort of authentic connection and heart connection and playing non-competitive volleyball and, you know, it was great. I was just like, I felt like I was in heaven, you know.
At 13?
I just felt like, oh my...
At 13?
Yeah, 13, I know, very precocious.
Wow.
My father used to read bedtime stories about, you know, I think he read 1984 to me. And, you know, I was raised in a very Jewish intellectual kind of climate.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I was, and, you know, we used to go to the Theosophical Society. I mean, it was, you know, I was exposed to lots of ideas. So, and I just got really enthusiastic about it. And also I didn't fit with my peers, you know, they were off experimenting with drugs and whatever. And I don't know, it just, that wasn't a direction that sort of felt good for me. So this was like, oh my God, there's a whole different life here, you know, and you can be yourself and be accepted. So that week was like, yeah, that was amazing. I was just, and it gave me, I guess, a sense of vision for how life could be or how relationships could be that in many ways has probably fueled me through the decades.
So taking your kids to those kinds of things may not actually destroy them.
Well, that's right. I mean, I can't say I took my kids to anything like that. But that was, you know, really my desire. That's really what I wanted to do. It was driven from me, not really from my mother or my parents.
Okay. And so another question would be not so much the what, but the who. Is there a person who comes to mind as having been a particular influence on you or having had an impact on your life?
Yeah, well, there's a number. Certainly my guru, who a year after doing the reevaluation counseling, then I learned meditation. I decided I wanted to learn meditation, and I did that, and I got very enthusiastic about it. So along with the meditation came guru, who I met about 7 years later, and probably spent a lot of my 80s going back and forth to India. So he was a very significant influence. Both the philosophy that he taught, which I really liked, both the kind of spiritual kind of guidance, as well as his orientation towards progressive social change and his ideas, very progressive ideas about women, which introduced me to feminism. So he's been a big influence on my life and continues to be. And then, you know, there's a lot of Gestalt teachers who have been really dear to my heart and very significant to me. In the early days of my training, there's a guy, George Rosner, who trains with Fritz, and he used to come across to Australia once, twice a year and run a 6 or 7 day residential. And he was sort of like the best of Gestalt. You know, he was just a very genuine human being and very creative. And he really communicated the excitement of Gestalt to us. So I think he's kind of one of my self-objects. He's in there, sort of, you know, guiding me in a sense in my Gestalt work. And then lots of other Gestalt people, Joseph Zinker, who, you know, he really inspired me and opened up the world of sort of working very relationally and very much from the heart in Gestalt. I was really touched very many times being with him. And Lynn Jacobs, you know, her relational gestalt has also been very significant for me. And I was very lucky to do some therapy with her when I was in LA. And we'd get to in the therapy sessions, we'd get to this point where she'd sort of, I don't know, do whatever she did. And then I'd sort of like come back to myself and I'd sort of get something about the way I am in the world, sort of outside my normal frame. And I just stop. I go, oh, right. It was just this moment where that sort of everything stopped and my whole forward momentum stopped. So, you know, I've had so many great moments with Gestalt teachers like that. And I have a Gestalt teacher for over 20 years in Australia, Chris Campbell, who's, you know, very much a master of sort of the relational world. And he's one of these people that in his life and in his therapy, there's no difference. He's the same person. So, you know, I've learned a lot about authentic relating from him. So these people, yeah, they've had a really big impact on me, and I really appreciate, you know, the time I've been able to spend with them and the way that I've been able to kind of absorb who they are as well as how they are.
Okay. So another question about a different sort of aspect of your person is how you experience and understand yourself within your gender or within your masculinity or as a man or however you'd like to describe that.
Sure, that's a great question, something I've contemplated for a very long time. I'm smiling because I went to a doctor recently in Newtown, Sydney, which is kind of hip area. And she's a very hip doctor, as it turned out. And, you know, I'm 61, so we're talking about malfunctioning and things. But rather than talking about men, she was talking about people with penises.
Yes.
Like, okay.
As it should be, right?
That's one way to frame it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, you know, avoiding the word man. So, or pinning people down too much. So, yeah, I'm a, you know, white cis guy. But what's more interesting, I think, is that when I was a teenager, because I became interested in feminism, then I also became interested in the men's movement, and I ended up actually getting very enthusiastic, work with Robert Bly and Warren Farrell at that time, the liberated man. And so again, very precociously in my 20s, I was running men's groups because I really wanted to explore, you know, new understandings of what it is to be a man and that type of thing, and gender relations. And then what became clearer as to my interest in that was when I was 25, my father, who was, you know, pretty sort of patriarchal male when I was growing up, came out as a transsexual. So that was like a surprise to me because I never would have imagined that. And he then went on to have the whole operation and transition and sort of live as a woman. So I guess, yeah, my interest in gender and gender relations and gender identity is very much contextualized by that, and kind of figuring that out for the rest of my adult life, you know, what it means to have a transsexual father and trying to figure out that relationship. It was actually a family constellation, first family constellation I attended, where I brought that up as the subject because, you know, it was kind of troubling me in lots of ways. I mean, I'm, you know, politically progressive and, you know, accept that, but it's not that simple being the son of a transsexual, because my father was like, he's like, well, I'm really a woman. And I'm like, well, that's great, but, you know, then who was I raised by? And he's like, well, that was just a mask. And anyway, I was, you know, trying to sort all that out. So the constellation was lovely. Because it helped me bring the two things together. You know, my father will always be my father, and my father now lives as himself in a different form. So, you know, I could sort of hold both those things, the he of my father and the she of Elaine, as she, you know, chose a name, and kind of paradoxically hold both those realities. So now, like when, I mean, he died a few years ago, I say he because I slip between he and she, you know, he, my father, she, Elaine. And so somehow, you know, just hold both those things as true. So yeah, that's a big area of sort of interest for me. And I wrote a piece on it that got published in a national newspaper in Australia about 20 years ago, and then it went on the internet. And I get a letter every month or so from someone, a child of transsexual or transsexual, responding to that piece that I wrote. And so it's very interesting to hear from other people and their struggles and such.
Okay. So another question, sort of shifting a little bit, is at what point or how did you find Gestalt, or did it find you, or how did you meet?
Sure.
How did that happen?
Well, so there's the context of reevaluation counselling. So that was, you know, as a teenager. And then in my early 20s, I was working for a meditation group, and I was driving cabs, and I ran a food co-op and worked for a magazine. I did lots of interesting things that, you know, I had a great time doing street theatre. So then when I was 25, I got married, and my wife became pregnant, and I thought I got to settle down. I got to figure out one thing to do and do it really well. So it just seemed natural that I would choose therapy as a course. Therapy always felt very natural to me, and it was just something that always felt very easy for me to do. So a friend of mine was studying Gestalt, and I was living in Sydney at the time. He was in this area in northern New South Wales, which is about 8 hours north of Sydney. And he would always tell me about Gestalt. And of course, you know how it is, you know, someone tells you about Gestalt and, you know, nobody ever really understands what it is. Well, it's kind of awareness, it's this, and then people glaze over. So yeah, I also didn't really understand what he was talking about, but I thought it sounded interesting. So, you know, and this is my risk orientation. So, you know, me and my wife moved with 2 pieces of furniture up to northern New South Wales. I enrolled in the Gestalt course. I had no idea really what Gestalt was, apart from my friend was doing it. But it just felt intuitively right. So I went to my first experience was a 7-day residential with this guy, George Rosner. And after the first day, I'm like, yes, I'm home. This is me. This is it. You know, I made the right choice. So I just settled, and I guess I've been settled for, you know, the last 35 years in it. So yeah, Gestalt came to me. I came to Gestalt, and just like, you know, I got my guru when I was 13. I still got the same guru, so I'm kind of a one guru guy. And, you know, Gestalt came to me, and, you know, I'm still doing Gestalt 35 years later. So I guess.
And so, what is it that you found? Like, what is it that made it feel like home, or what, you know, excited or sparked that in you?
Well, I guess it's like, you know, Gestalt's kind of anarchic, and I really like that because I've got this a bit rebellious against authority streak, for good and for ill. So I like that anarchic nature, the sort of freedom of it, the sense of really being able to be yourself, the authentic thing. And what came with George and his version of Gestalt was this enormous creativity, just like, you know, as Zinka says, Gestalt is permission to be creative. So that really resonated with me and continues to do so, because I like, you know, generating lots of creative options. And I guess you know, because I'm kind of interested in the spiritual thing, there's something about Gestalt and its depth. It's not just a set of techniques, it's really about a way of being fundamentally. So that really, I guess, is part of what resonates with me.
Okay. And so what has become your thing within Gestalt? Like, what do you do with it, or where have you taken it?
Well, you know, I'm not one of these like forefront thinkers. I mean, I'm a smart guy, but I'm not like, you know, a Lynn Jacobs or someone who really kind of develops thought in amazing ways. I really respect people like that, Gordon Wheeler, etc. I'm a good teacher, so I can take Gestalt and sort of bring it alive as it is. So I guess, yeah, the things that are Gestalt for me are really just plunging into the depth of what is Gestalt, and particularly nowadays, you know, relational Gestalt, as many people and myself identify, is really stripping myself away so that I'm inviting the client to expose themselves and to tell me about who they are, and my version of Gestalt is being willing to do that equally to the client, to match the client. Wherever they go, I'm willing to go there. And sometimes lead the way, you know, if the client's feeling shy or something, you know, I'll talk about myself. That's what I learned from Chris Campbell. It's strange. I'll just tell us a little bit about Chris. The trainees would find it strange when I brought Chris into the training, because he'd come into the training and he'd spend like the first half an hour talking about himself. And they're like, hey, dude, you know, you're supposed to be teaching us Gestalt or something. Well, you know, why are you talking about yourself? And he's like, well, you know, if you're going to work with me, you need to know who I am. It's like, okay. So I kind of like that, you know, the clients working with me, you know, they deserve to know something of who I am. So I've become very, very willing to be completely transparent. There's really nothing, I don't think there's anything I wouldn't reveal to a client about myself, you know, that is supportive within the therapy. So that's a kind of a radical transparency that I'm interested in practicing and do my best to practice.
Okay. And how would you say that your involvement with Gestalt, or, you know, Gestalt as another, has affected you? How has that affected your person?
Well, because, you know, as I say, I'm interested in Gestalt, not just as a therapeutic modality, in a sense, as a way of life, as a way of being, then I've really worked hard to take the Gestalt principles and find ways to live them in my lives and my relationship, you know, to varying degrees of success or failure. However, I always kind of hold myself accountable to that. And so that's what's most important to me, is the who am I as a person and the how do I manifest Gestalt. And, you know, I'm no saint, I'm no Gestalt icon. I mean, I have lots of foibles. I guess what I'm interested in doing is kind of recognizing my limitations and foibles and bring them back into a relationship. And yeah, admitting them. And my name, Vinay, is the spiritual name, is a quality like humility and modesty, which, you know, often I'm a bit larger than life. So it's a good reminder to sort of ground myself and, you know, be a bit more contained. But it's also something to do with that too, is in amidst the expansiveness and the excitement of connection and contact, also being willing to sort of drop down and really recognize, yeah, where my limitations are and where my scratchy bits are, where my reactiveness is.
Okay. So this next question is, some people find it relevant. Some people are like, I don't even know what you're talking about. So it's whether you feel like you're part of a Gestalt community or not. I mean, does that mean anything to you?
Sure. Well, I would say yes, no, yes, because you know, for a long time
Is that
as a
like
student,
simultaneous, or is that a
well,
progression?
it's sequential.
Yeah.
You know, as a learning Gestalt and coming into the Gestalt world, I think my first Gestalt conference was in 1987. And, you know, that was a big experience for me. And there's all these kind of, you know, old Gestalt people who kind of knew each other. And then there was me, fresh-faced, along with other bunch of new people as well. And I felt a bit sort of like, there's a Gestalt community, but, you know, there's all these really cool people that I couldn't quite connect with because they already had their connections. So that was, you know, a little difficult. But then I found a community with, you know, more newbies like myself. And yeah, I'm very much a networking kind of person. So I like connecting with people and around the world and such. So I really maintain lots of relationships with different people. Frank Rubenfeld's one, you know, I think I met him back when I was like, 28 or something at the beginning of my Gestalt. I went to visit him because, you know, someone recommended him. And so I've maintained a connection with him over the years. I still go to visit him, you know, almost 35 years later. So that's part of my sense of connection and the community. So, you know, that evolved, and then I set up my own institute in Australia, and I wanted to actually form a Gestalt community in Australia between the different institutes. But the efforts that I made didn't work out, and then someone else stepped in, and somehow this Gestalt community in Australia coalesced. So I was right there in the beginning, very enthusiastic and very much participating in it. And I think we did a lot of really great things. We had standards and accreditation and really formed, conferences, did a lot of wonderful stuff that I feel very happy with and were really good experiences. And then, any bunch of human beings and organizations and, after a decade, politics come out and little cliques and all the things that human beings do anywhere. But I guess I was a bit naive because I'm always on the sort of optimistic side of things and the idealistic side of things. And I was looking to the potential and such and wasn't really paying that as much attention to the shadows that were emerging, even when they were kind of in my face. So, I sort of, as I do, engage with the struggle in the community around differences and really wanted to meet that. But I found that if I can use the metaphor, the shadows were creeping or something, including my own shadow. I'm not just going to project it out there. I've got plenty of my own shadows that sort of mix with the shadows of the collective. And through lots of kind of increasingly painful experiences with various elements of Gestalt community, I finally was separated from that community. And that was, very painful and kind of had of elements of shame and it was a big juncture actually, and led to some time of a lot of reflection about my role in that and people and power and all sorts of things that I hadn't really thought as deeply about in my sort of Pollyanna sort of positivity before. So the kick in the guts of the separation from community was, obviously, in the long run, it was a great learning opportunity, to use that cliche, because I could see a lot more of myself and my own blind spots, and also recognize both the strength of community and the problems with community. So at that time, that was about 10 years ago, I met Bill Hanlon, who's an Ericksonian therapist, and I was doing a workshop with him, and I was talking with him about what had happened to me. And it was a wonderful thing. He said to me, look, I also had a difficult experience with the Ericksonian community, and I also separated from that community, and it was also painful to me. He said, but what I've gone on to do is really have a very creative life, and really, he's written lots of books and done lots of teaching and found his own sort of stride. So that was really great to meet him and hear that, and it sort of strengthened me to, my life's not over because I'm not part of the community anymore. So I guess since then, what I've done is for my own kind of Gestalt community. Like I teach and I travel different countries of the world, especially Asia, and now especially China. So really I've developed a Gestalt community in China, which is, I guess according to my values or something, I create certain kind of safety and a certain kind of adventurousness. And so my own unique mix is sort of imprinted on the way that I've nurtured and fostered that community. And so, I feel very much a part of that community, as well as now this connection with sort of different Gestalt people around the world that sort of resonate, I guess, with my values. So I don't anymore feel part of like, I'm just going to go to a Gestalt conference anymore. It's a more sort of attenuated sense of community.
Okay, interesting. So is there something, I mean, maybe in a different context, but is there a particular challenge that you identify that you've gone through either in your practice or in some other aspect of your being? I mean, it can be Gestalt or not Gestalt related. I'm just curious about the challenge.
Sure. Well, I mean, there's, I guess, I can talk about a couple of challenges. So one challenge which I face currently is, so I've got 5 grown kids, and I love raising those kids. I like kids. I wish I could have had more. And my kids also all have gone in different directions. Some of them kind of more parallel to my values, some kind of quite different. So my eldest daughter, who has chosen a path kind of very different than my values in a lot of ways, including talking about gender, she's married a man who's very traditional in his gender ideas, and she's adopted those ideas. So, her boys have crew cuts, and, if they fall over, she tells them, get up, no need to cry, very, very hard edged sort of ideas of masculinity, for instance, that are very different than mine. So
I'm
yeah, with
assuming
my,
you're pretty open about this series of differences with her, right? To
oh
be.
yes, well, I'm always into dialogue and talking
Mhm.
about it, but it's been more difficult for her to deal with those differences. So that's led a couple of years ago to her cutting off from me, to not being willing to talk with me or even let me see the grandchildren. So that's been very painful for me because, I'm a great believer in dialogue, across any difference. And so now I'm faced with a situation where there's no possibility of dialogue. And, that's really I tried every which way, the therapy and, for us and whatever. So that's been very challenging because in my belief in dialogue as a possible way through all sorts of difficulties or differences, where I'm faced with the impossibility of dialogue, it's very challenging. And, I have to find a different way to come to terms with those differences and some kind of like acceptance without the possibility of a bridge. So yeah, that's been challenging and continues to be challenging.
Mhm.
It's like I asked Steve Gilligan for his advice about a metaphor that could help me with that, and he gave me the what is it, the AA thing, the capacity to recognize the things we can't change, and the things we
The
can
serenity
change, and the
prayer.
wisdom to
Hmm.
know. That's right, wisdom to know the difference. So yeah, it's like that. Like I'm such a believer in being able to change things or do something about things, that to meet something that I can't change is like, whoa, okay,
Hmm.
wow. I have to come back to myself and just recognize that, I can't do everything. And Gestalt doesn't answer everything. And dialogue isn't always possible. So that's been very sobering and a big challenge. And I guess another thing that I talk about in terms of challenge is my wife has a particular way of looking at the world which is very different than mine. I'm very optimistic and glass half, full, and she's more sort of pessimistic and sees people's limitations and such, which, I've learned a lot from. And one of the ideas that's come out of our dialogues together, because she's also trained in Gestalt, is this term that we've coined, the unvirtues. So the unvirtue is sort of like when if something identifies a virtue, it's like in the middle of that is the unvirtue. I mean, Gestalt, we might say polarity or shadow, but it's like a particular way of understanding that right within the heart of the very thing that I'm so proud of is a hole or some blind spot. So I'm very interested in the challenge of, for instance, recognizing my own virtues, because I'm this sort of optimistic person, and so that means sort of looking at things a little like, Gestalt is for me a very positive, humanistic sort of orientation to human beings, which I like. So
I thought it was
recognizing,
nihilistic and existentialist.
well, but the thing is, the way Fritz adopted existentialism is quite positive. He didn't take the nihilism; he took the choice from us. So, Gestalt extracted that out of existentialism as something very empowering. So that's one of the really cool things that Fritz did, I think. So yeah, I think Gestalt has that positive version of existentialism, positive, approach to human beings, the organismic self-regulation, etc. So yeah, I've learned over the years, both with myself and also with clients, that you know um, there is pathology in a sense. We call it creative adjustment, and we do lots of lovely things in Gestalt with it. And one way of understanding it is also pathology. People are, they do fucked up things sometimes, and um, so it's a long process of me understanding how to integrate the dim view of humanity along with this sort of optimistic view of humanity, and then with myself to recognize the challenge of recognizing, yeah, my own unvirtues. And actually, in China, I have an organizer, wonderful woman who's very dynamic and really marvelous the way that she's been facilitating the coming together of the Gestalt community in China. And one of the things I really like about her is she's a woman. she's completely authentic. She just owns her own virtues. Sometimes she's a very unpleasant or harsh person, but she doesn't pretend, you know, she just says, yeah, that's me, you know, that's what I'm doing. Like there's no hiding of that. And I really appreciate that. So that's something I guess is my own learning journey, is to really recognize and acknowledge my own self-interest in amidst my generosity or kindness or expansiveness.
That sounds fair. Okay, so the other question is not so much the polarity, because sometimes they're really directly related, I'm noticing, but is what comes to mind as sort of one of your highlights or one of your greatest experiences or moments. And I am actually asking that both ways, within Gestalt, either, you know, in your practice or in whatever aspect, and in your person.
Right. Well, in Gestalt, maybe not so much a moment. I'm going to talk about something a little differently, like, because I've been working in Asia for the last 10 years, South Korea, Japan, China, and sort of, you know, got to understand something of those cultures and have developed a sense of connection. So now mainly I'm working in China. So it's not a moment, it's an experience which I really love about being in China and Chinese people, especially, that's who I'm working with. There's like, I describe it as like this sort of subterranean flow. It's different than being in the West. There's like some sort of deep channel of water. And I really love the experience of tapping into that. It feels like I'm sort of into that channel. So that's enormously meaningful and pleasurable and fulfilling to me. And I noticed it, you know, I sort of go to China 1 month and then I'm back in Australia or somewhere else. And so I kind of noticed the contrast of going in and out of that and back into it. So, yeah, that's something I'd certainly name as a meaningful experience in Gestalt or culturally, I guess we're saying. And other than that, a meaningful personal experience, significant personal experience, oh goodness. I mean, I guess I'm just going to pick what's most to hand, is playing with my grandchildren, you know. That's just so ecstatic for me. I mean, that's a big word, but it is. I just feel so happy and so in love with them. And so, you know, playing with them is just such a joy. And, you know, when I was a parent, like, you know, I did my best and I played with my kids, but as a grandparent, I have more time. So it's heaven. I don't have to fob them off, you know, I can,
Yeah.
yes, let's just play. That's wonderful. Yeah.
Okay. And the last real question that I have is, you know, what's next? What's next for you personally? And, you know, given the context that we're in the world right now, where do you think Gestalt could or should go from here?
Yes, well, because I travel and teach, where next is a little weird. You know, of course, none of us know exactly what's going to happen or when or how. So my normal capacity to plan 2 years in advance is completely up in the air, and I'm not even sure how I'm going to get back to China at the moment. It's very difficult to get a visa. So that's uncertain. I certainly, I mean, I don't like online teaching. It's not really my thing. I like face-to-face teaching. So that's not really something I want to do a lot of directly. However, I did record a few years ago all 82 hours of me lecturing in Gestalt, all the theory, all the units that I teach. I sort of captured it on video. It's very boring just looking at my talking head. So what we're doing is I'm getting some explainer videos made. So, you know, there's whiteboard sort of things that they sketch out as you're talking. So I'm going to get that done with all the 82 hours, which will hopefully make it a lot more interesting. And, you know, so I'm excited about that, both for Gestalt students and maybe, you know, other professionals who are interested in Gestalt, that this might bring it to life. I'm a bit hesitant about releasing all that theory because Gestalt's so much not about the theory. It's so much about the integration. So, you know, but anyway, that's what I'm doing. And I'm hoping that that's going to be a great contribution somewhere. So that's part of the what's next. That it's a big project. It's going to probably take a year to do, and I'm just finding the people to do it at the moment. What else? In terms of Gestalt itself, I don't know. Like, you know, there's always an intention or an effort to expand and grow and develop. And Gestalt, in some ways, have been integrating elements from, you know, maybe other therapies or attachment theory or something over the last years. I really have no idea where Gestalt's going. What's more significant for me is, I guess, the roots of Gestalt, because I mean, Gestalt draws from the Western phenomenological tradition. That's certainly core to who we are and what we do and our philosophy. And Fritz also dipped into the Eastern tradition. And as much as he didn't really understand it, I think, you know, in his amazing way, he did capture some core elements from Zen, from Taoism, and especially being in Asia, I really see Gestalt as a kind of a Taoist type of psychotherapy. Very, very interesting in that regard. So, you know, the practice of Wu Wei, that is the creative void, as we say in English. So I'm interested in that. I think that in some ways the direction of Gestalt is not just encompassing new theory or something. It's really going into the heart of what's kind of a bit more like an undefinable or kind of semi-mystical element, which is this Wu Wei. And so I become very interested in, well, how do you teach that? You can't really teach it. You can sort of talk about it, but you know, you can't tell someone how to do it. And yet that's one of the things that I want to support my trainees to be able to understand or practice. So from my point of view, some of the future of Gestalt, I hope, is going into that depth. But that's not shiny, you know, you can't really write too many papers about it. It's something much more experiential. Yeah, so that's kind of, I guess, my perspective.
Okay. Interesting. So I don't really have any more questions at this point. So I'm wondering if there's anything that you would like to add or anything that you feel like I am missing.
Well, I appreciate the questions. They're great questions. They get me going, they get me excited. I'm an excitable kind of a person. Yeah, I guess, well, my own interests, as I say, are psychotherapy, spirituality, social change. And I've been really happy to see both AAGT and EAGT some of the work that's been done in addressing larger social issues and in bringing that in Gestalt in various ways. I really appreciate that work. I think it's very important. And I'm very interested in systems theory, cybernetics. One of the things my dad introduced me to when I was a kid was cybernetics. And so I've been very interested in that as an adult because, you know, Gestalt obviously draws on field theory. So that's something that really fascinates and excites me. And I've also studied family constellations. And you know, of course, that's based very much on field theory. So a lot of my personal interest is sort of going into more depth in understanding, the nature of field dynamics and how that works. You know, Malcolm Parlett's done a wonderful job of those 5 principles, and that's just one way to capture an understanding of field theory. So for me, that's a rich area to sort of explore and understand. And I'm currently doing a PhD on the topic of power, which comes out of my experience with Gestalt community, because I could see that as much as we have all this wonderful knowledge and experience and depth as Gestalt therapists about, you know, the intimacy skills, as Stephanie Bachman and Sonia Neves called them, the wonderful article on that, intimate skills and strategic skills, that there is the I-it domain, which is about strategic skills. And so I think as Gestalt therapists, we have a lot of understanding of that sort of intimate dialogue, perhaps the I-thou, and yet there can be a lack of understanding of the strategic skills and especially the nature of power. And that's what I saw in the Gestalt organization, as in any organization, you know, you get these power dynamics going on. And so at the time, I didn't really understand it. I was, again, kind of naive. I thought, yeah, everything would be solved by dialogue and everything. And then I could see that no, there's gaps in that's not enough, and that you need a new set of skills and understanding. So that's kind of what I'm interested in my PhD, is understanding the interpersonal dynamics of power. And I think that that's very useful as a larger picture of human nature and human interaction. I mean, there's the intimate dimension of human experience, whether it be at home in the family or relationships, maybe in the work context or something. However, most of us spend a lot of time in the domain of business or work or something where, you can use authenticity or various elements of that, but it's also about something else. And so much it's about the operations of power. And it seems to me that in terms of awareness, that there's very little awareness of power, how it's used, who am I in my use of power. So I've become quite excited about that, and I think it's an important topic. There's a woman that I follow, Sita Barstow, who's established the Right Use of Power Institute, and she's done a lot of really good pioneering work on this. So yeah, I'd like to continue that and find a way maybe to bring some of the Gestalt elements and bring that into like some sort of training, skill development in terms of awareness of using power.
Interesting. So it sounds almost organizational, but still interpersonal and almost social and political too.
Yeah, that's right.
It's a lot. It's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I ask people, at the end, it's like, oh, so what are you writing next? And now I have this list of books that haven't even been written yet that I'm actually kind of excited about reading. So yeah, that sounds like a very interesting direction. And I'm totally abusing the word interesting, but honestly, I don't have a better one. It's just, yes, that captures my interest.
Yeah.
So
cool.
Yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate your time and appreciate your energy. And if it's okay with you, we will leave this here. Sound good?
Wonderful. I really appreciate you doing this, Heather. I think it's wonderful. You're doing like a version of oral history and, future visioning and all the things that come together when you talk to a person. And so I really appreciate you doing this project and inviting me on. Thanks very much.
Thank you.